Number 8 has to do with pacing yourself. On the multiple choice section, you'll have 40 questions and 90 minutes. So that leaves 2 minutes per question and an additional 10 minutes to check your work, go back and look at questions that you may have skipped initially, so that you'll have, I think, ample time on this section of the test. Many of my students are able to finish a little bit early, even as they go back and check work and reread questions that they weren't sure about in the first place. Most important advice is not spend too long on any one question. Although it's generally true that the questions get slightly harder as you move forward towards number 40, it's not strictly true. So you may find question 38 challenging, but then question 39 is something that is really comfortable. So they're all worth the same amount. It's not worth spending 5 minutes struggling on one question that might cost you 2 other questions that you're really comfortable with. As I mentioned, the questions do generally get harder towards the end, so it might not be too surprising to find a couple of questions in the 30 to 40 range that are challenging, that you might want to take a look at and decide whether to skip on the first pass. For the multiple choice section, usually the pacing is reasonably good if you don't get bogged down on a question. The free response section is a little bit different story again. Josh mentioned that there really are 2 pieces to the free response section, questions 1 through 5, and then the investigative task. All told, you've got 90 minutes to complete this, but it's really important, since question 6 counts for 1/8 of the total exam score, not to run out of time there. So a little bit of additional information on that investigative task. It's important that students know that question 6 is going to ask them to do something they've never done before. The questions are really cleverly written so that they may start out with something that students have seen and then build on that and gradually move outside the box. What I find really interesting is that some of my students who might not be able to answer one of questions 1 through 5 successfully can often make really good progress on question 6 because they're just creative thinkers. I know there are times when some of my students have outscored me on question 6 because I kind of know the basic techniques really well, but then get encumbered by trying to think in a new way. So I think these are really fun problems to try. They are going to require some creative thinking to be able to get a 4, but it's very doable for students to be able to earn at least a 2 on this question if they just attack it in the way that the question is organized. My advice to my students is always to start with questions they feel confident about. So I'll have them look at questions 1 through 5, and at this point in the year, they know their strengths and weaknesses pretty well. So they will gravitate towards usually question 1 because it's meant to be fairly accessible to everyone on the exam to get everyone off to a good start. And then 2 or so of the other 4 questions, maybe they're really comfortable with questions about normal distributions, and there's maybe they'll see a question about that. My students tend to actually really like hypothesis testing and confidence intervals because we've done them for quite a while now, and so they'll tend to gravitate toward those. Some of my students really enjoy the questions about surveys and experiments, and when they see that question, they'll go attack that one. But none of my students will save question 6 until the end. That's something we've worked really deliberately on. It is possible that if you get bogged down in a question on the free response section, you will run out of time. So if you're going to run out of time, you don't want to run out of time before the one that counts 1/8 of the free response score. So free advice, start with question 1, but don't feel obliged to work in a linear order after that. It's usually pretty straightforward. Hey, Josh, over to 7.
All right. I wanted to add one thing to the pacing issue, and that is I had a teacher in a workshop who told me a story about how he had a student that was quietly waiting for the proctor to tell him to move on to question 6 after he finished questions 1 through 5 because there's a new set of directions for question 6. Even though it's the same instructions, it's sort of designated separately. And then the proctor said, time is up, and then, he didn't have time to do question 6 at all. So let your students know that in the layout of the exam, there's sort of a new heading and a new set of directions for question 6, but they're allowed to go in any order.